So this is now the second video that I'm producing on some principles of Christian parenting. What are some things that Christians need to keep very central, keep very close to their chests when they consider their job as parents, and especially the goals of parenting? What's the ultimate end of a successful job of parenting? And the Christian perspective, as we looked at in the last video, is that this child, I'm a steward of this child who belongs to God, and God therefore has some goals for them which may not align with the goals that Western society and secular society has primarily put on children. The goals for God is that they would be people who glorify Him, and most importantly, people who are ready for the day of salvation. So we looked at those things in the first video, and I want to look at 3 additional principles in this video. So this first one is going to be principle number 4 of 6 total that I have. And again, these are purposely not complex. I'm purposely not making these super involved. I want these to be things that you can readily understand and keep as some conceptual, as a conceptual framework for what the job and the purpose of parenting is. So the first one in this video, 4th one overall, is that in the home, the Christian parent needs to live and breathe Jesus Christ. And the reason why I say in the home is because in the home is when our true colors really come out. Somebody can put on a good show at church. Maybe they can do so when they're at the grocery store or out and about with friends. But your kids are watching everything that you do. They're listening to everything that you say. And the place where they're going to see the real you, where there's no filter, and that's going to be at the home. That's going to be in the home. And I think that as you look back on this generation, a large generation of Christian parents whose children did not grow up to be Christians, you sit back and wonder what were the reasons for it. A lot of it had to do with this thing that we do in life, which in most areas is perfectly fine, and it's called compartmentalizing. We take pretty much every aspect of ourselves and we compartmentalize it. And we have a compartment for our hobbies, and a compartment for our chores, and a compartment for our sports, and a compartment for church, and a compartment for Christianity. But the problem is that Christianity isn't a compartment. When you die to the old man and you become this new creation in Jesus Christ, your Christianity is simply who you are. It isn't a compartment. It's going to be something rather that's so central to who you are that it will actually inform all of those other things. It should, or it really isn't true Christianity. True Christianity is going to inform everything of who you are. Whether you're in a worship setting around pious persons, or you're sitting at the dinner table with only those who know you the best, and there's nothing really to lose by letting your true colors show. So this first principle is to live and breathe Christ at home. And when kids see that you do that, they're going to learn and they're going to understand, even without you having to expressly say so, Christ is the most important thing in the world. There is nothing above Him. Let me read a scripture from Deuteronomy Chapter 6, and it speaks, honestly, from the perspective of being a Christian parent and knowing what that should look like on the day in and the day out. Deuteronomy Chapter 6 is perhaps the clearest passage in all the Bible in that regard. And again, remember back to Proverbs chapter 22. Raise up a child, or train up a child in the way that he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. This is a general truth, meaning if we faithfully implement these kinds of passages, we're going to be raising Christian offspring. Deuteronomy 6, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Listen to this. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So the idea when God is giving covenant to his people, and he wants, the most important thing is love God with everything. Love God with all of your heart, all your soul, all your mind. And it's amazing to me that immediately after making that command, which Jesus says in Matthew chapter 22 is the greatest command in all the Bible, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. It's amazing to me that the first application after that has to do with parenting. And it's like God's going to know whether or not you love him based on the kinds of things that you're passing on to your kids, the kinds of conversations that you have. And he's speaking, this is Old Testament Jewish covenant, but the principle is true to, irrespective of the covenant. Talk about God and the things of God and the expectations of God and the promises of God and the will of God and the goodness and the sovereignty of God. In every environment, he talks about when you're sitting down. So when you're having dinner with your family and you're eating a meal, when you're walking by the way, or when you're driving, when you are getting ready to lie down at night, and when you wake up in the morning, he says, find ways to talk about this relationship and this reality of God in every environment with your kids and with your family. You shall teach it faithfully to them. And it's interesting, he even says, write stuff down on the doorposts of your house. Put it on your walls. My wife likes to shop at Hobby Lobby, and fortunately there's a Starbucks nearby so that I can do something while she's doing that. But when she goes to Hobby Lobby, there's all sorts of signs in there, scriptures, things from, Joshua. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And we've got scriptures all over the house. We've got one from Hosea, seek justice, love mercy, and act humbly. And we've got scriptures all over the house. But it's not just that you've got scriptures on the walls and things that are being seen in that regard, but there has to be a constant vocal reminder of it, bringing them back to the things that are most important. And I think that in principle, as he's talking about, bringing covenant into all of our conversation with our children, I think that means that we should be finding creative ways to insert conversations about God into every kind of circumstance that our kid might be in. Are they fearful? Remind them of the many passages in the Bible that say, fear not. You are mine. I believe Isaiah said that, or God said it through Isaiah. Are they taking toys from other kids? Find ways to talk about the golden rule and doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Are they seeing, friends and people around them whose parents, the marital institution is kind of breaking down? Talk to them about God's design for marriage being one man and one woman for their whole life. That is God's design. And always bringing it back to these things. I think because of what he says here, and this is critical, parents need to be reading the Bible with their children every single day. It needs to be seen, the supremacy of this book and the God who breathed it into existence needs to be so clear in the mind of that kid that as he develops, he knows this is above education, secular education. This is education. This is above my peers. This is above politics. This is above any worldly philosophy. This is above any news channel or any kind of entertainment. This is sort of the source of our life, and we need to understand that, and that needs to be impressed by these words from Deuteronomy Chapter 6. So that's the first principle, is to live and breathe Christ in the home. The second one today, which is number 5 overall, is to prioritize Jesus Christ over all extracurricular activities. And not just extracurricular activities, but even just the most basic activities like school or whatever else. Christ needs to be prioritized above all of those things. So there needs to be, it needs to be understood by example and by specific action from mom and dad to the child that Jesus Christ is more important than any of the other things they could be involved in. And a couple scriptures come to mind. The first one is Matthew chapter 6 and verse 33. I think we know this passage pretty well, but Jesus said, "Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then all these other things will be added to you." And it's interesting, the things that he'd mentioned before this were things like clothing and food that you would eat and drink for the body. So he's talking about the most basic sustaining components of life: food, water, and clothing to stay warm and to be modest and whatever else. He says, seek God's kingdom before you seek those things. Seek first God's kingdom, and then everything else will be added to you. So he's speaking of this priority that needs to be in place, that God and Jesus are prioritized above everything else. And so if he's saying seek first the kingdom before things like food and water and clothes, what does that mean for sporting events and for birthday parties and for activities like that that can demand so much of our time? When I was growing up, I was a competitive wrestler for most of my growing up years. And one of the things that still stands with me today, years and years after my wrestling career is finished, is that church, and not just being in a building, but going to worship God and pray to God and learn about him and grow in communion and fellowship with brothers and sisters, that was always, no matter what, the priority. In fact, it didn't matter if the state championship wrestling tournament was on Sunday morning. I wasn't going to be at it. I was going to be at church. And I can say, coming out of that kind of environment, because my parents prioritized Christ over sports and any extracurricular or anything, it had a profound impact on my worldview and the way that I see things. Even now as an adult, Proverbs 22:6, that is my perspective, and I owe that completely to my parents. And the fortunate thing is that should you do this with your children, they're going to see it that way as well. I had so many peers and friendships and relationships growing up, even in church, even within youth groups, where those kids, if there was a sporting event, they were going to be at the sporting event. If there was a birthday party or a slumber party or maybe a weekend getaway with a friend, they were able to be at those things. And without mom and dad even saying it to be so, they learned just kind of naturally that the priority of Jesus is somewhat lower than these other things. In other words, Jesus is going to be the main thing until there's something else that I want to do more. And to be honest, unfortunately, a lot of those very kids that I grew up with are no longer faithful to the Lord. They're gone. And so parents need to remember to prioritize Christ over everything. And one other kind of basic application is when you go on vacations as a family, if you are, back at home, if you're at services for the morning and the evening and for midweek Bible study, then on vacation, do the same thing. Again, this was something that my parents, they may not have, it was just an expectation. I didn't ever even really think about it until I grew up and I was out of the house and had to start thinking about what I was going to do and how I was going to behave. But I learned through that. When we're on vacation, we were literally going to church like 3 times when we're on vacation. And the impact was Jesus Christ is most important. And I'm so thankful to God for it. And my prayer is that you would pass that on with your kids as well. You may not have had that kind of environment, but when you know better, you can pass it on to your kids and start a legacy that will be lasting. Let me throw in, this just came to me, and this is something I've thought about a lot. I don't even know why this isn't one of the principles that I had here, but I'm just going to throw it in as an extra. I think we need to raise our children in such a way that our grandchildren are Christians. In other words, it needs to be so expected that our children are going to be faithful to the Lord that we're talking to them and expecting that they would be raising their kids that way. So looking far enough down the line, you're not just stopping at this next generation, but you're looking at the generation after that and impressing it so deeply on the kid that they begin to realize, okay, this is going to be my job one day. And I think it makes them own their faith a little bit more. So that's the 5th plus a bonus. And then the last one today is, again, I hope practical. Parents, Christian parents, need to be monitoring outside influences, whatever they may be. These may be peers, but especially, it's going to be peers, and it's going to be devices, cell phones, iPads, computers, television programs, all different kinds of media, Snapchat, a number of anything that the kid is receiving into their life, it needs to be monitored. Now, for whatever reason, I get the impression that keeping kids innocent and keeping kids naive is somehow a bad thing. And that's something that I've never really understood. When God made Adam and Eve, guess what? They were naive, both of them. And he said it was very good. We don't need to have an intimate experiential knowledge and awareness of the kinds of wickedness that there are in the world. I don't see the value in that. We need to be keeping our children innocent. And in today's society, when there are attacks from virtually every angle to take away that innocence and that purity at the youngest of ages, we have to be vigilant. I really think we do. And it needs to be very active. Cell phones maybe need to be taken away at night. They need to have controls put on them. There needs to be reports being sent to mom and dad of the kinds of things that they're seeing. And even the kinds of friends that they're hanging out with who you might expect to be really good friends or, real good kids because they seem nice and polite and their parents at church are good as well. That doesn't mean that they're not going to get into some things that they shouldn't, that we certainly wouldn't want for them to get into. In 1 Corinthians 15, there's this reminder that bad company ruins good morals. And the principle there is be careful the kinds of people you hang out with. And I think even broader than that, be careful the kinds of things that you're putting into your life. Your bad company may be the television programs that you're watching, but it corrupts good morals. So this is really important as you're fulfilling the command from Deuteronomy 6. And as you're considering all the things God wants, you're prioritizing Christ over extracurricular activities. You may be doing all of those things, but if you're not monitoring the other things, all those good morals that you're establishing, they can so easily be overrun by the schemes of the devil. It's a wicked world that we live in. And parents, we have to be vigilant. You have to be thinking about that. I watched a video recently from another Christian preacher on YouTube who was talking about why his family does not do sleepovers, either in their house or in other people's houses. And it was a really informative, enlightening video, and it had something to do with this kind of principle of keeping a close eye on their influences. And it was interesting that he spoke about how after he'd produced this video, he received sort of this overwhelming outpouring of responses from parents who'd had absolutely devastating and terrible consequences for things like slumber parties and sleepovers, where the kid is going to sleep over at somebody else's house. And in my family, that's the decision that we've made as well. We're not going to do any of those. They're just, in general, they're just going to be off limits. And you don't have to explain it to anybody. If you just say, in our family, we don't do that. Keep a close eye on those kids. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 19, and this is to adults, and so how much more so to kids, it says, be wise to what is good and innocent to what is evil. We don't need to have an in-depth awareness of the kinds of things that go on in Hollywood behind the scenes and in the sexual culture that we live in. What value is there in that? There is none. And we need to be protecting our kids from those kinds of things. So, last principle is monitor outside influences. I hope that these videos are helpful. I will probably do some more in terms of maybe the marital institution and the relationship between husbands and wives. Because in this society where family is being broken down, it's really being attacked, Christians need to be educated, and we need to stand up and we need to do something to represent the institution of God. It's the oldest institution in the world, and it's also the purest, and it's also the foundation of a good society, the family. So I hope these things are helpful to you. I appreciate you for tuning in. If they are helpful, please subscribe to the video, and please consider sharing with your friends. God bless you, and I love you.